afternoon, everyone. My name is Rapelang Rabana, and I'll be talking to you about the digital employee experience. This is something that's pretty close to my heart, and it's not just the kind of digital experience that is about online payslips or digital collaboration tools. I'm really talking about the experience that allows people to learn and adapt to the changing world of work. At Rekindle Learning, this is really our big focus. We think about how do we marry smart technology to really important learning principles so that we get the best out of the tools that we use and that people can actually learn, adapt, and perform. Why is this even important? I think we all know a number of the stats around employee engagement. A lot of it really speaks to how much happier people are if they're engaged, how much more productive they are, how much higher the employee promoter scores are, and lower absenteeism. In the US, where a lot more research about this is done, they estimate that the cost of disengaged employees is something close to $550 billion per year. So I don't think any of us can sort of afford to let this slip by. And that's really why I'm tackling this question today. There's a lot of other questions and stats that we're seeing around this critical need for organizations to adapt and respond so that they do become more resilient and adaptable. The World Economic Forum has said stuff like 54% of employees will need to be reskilled every 3 years. Harvard Business School considers adaptation, or the ability to adapt, one of the most important critical business skills today. So it's quite evident that we're not going to get away from this concept of adaptability and resilience. And for me, when we actually unpack it and get behind this concept of adaptation and resilience, to me, it realizes that we have to come to the point where we acknowledge that a learning organization is the only kind of organization that can be adaptable and resilient. And that we have to come back to how much of that learning culture is actually instilled in the organizations we work in. Once we answer that, then we're able to understand how we take people along the journey. Companies, are always busy doing a million and one things. There's something new to tackle, a new strategy, a new product, a new way of work, some new priorities, new regulations, all as we seek to, drive new revenue, reduce the cost to serve and extract efficiencies, or improve the customer's experience or improve the employee's experience. These are all things that, we can write on a piece of paper and people get to hear about it. But unless you take everyone in the organization on the journey, which implies a learning experience, these things won't actually manifest and we won't materialize the impact in the business value that we seek. So with this constant change, it's essential to leverage technology and multimodal forms of learning to actually achieve it. So when we look at this quadrant on the screen now, I'm sure you're all familiar with having done a number of these activities. And the challenge I find is that regardless of where you're working in terms of your business's priorities, when it comes time to make sure that people are on the same page, that they're empowered to know what to do, we revert back to very traditional approaches to empowering people and sharing knowledge. We probably write up a memo and we send an email and blast it out to everyone and hope to God somebody reads it, which we know doesn't actually happen. Or we have in-person workshops, and with COVID, that's actually not a reality. So we do Zoom calls and other team calls to try have that same engagement. And if you've ever been on a half-day Zoom call, you kind of know how tough that can be. Or we use traditional learning systems where you put PowerPoints and PDFs somewhere online and everyone just flicks through slide to slide. So none of that learning or insight or expertise that you so badly wanted the teams to get actually gets transferred. And I think the reason we're struggling with this is because learning actually encompasses multiple modalities, and we're really only focusing on one. And I want us to think about how we create a much wider and richer experience. And for this, I'm going to turn to one of my recent favorite authors and thinkers, Colby, who coins the concept of 4 learning modalities. He says that we start with the concept of watching, which is really a reflective observation type of learning. We also have the thinking type of learning, which is about abstract conceptualization. There's also doing, which is really more active experimentation type of learning. And there's feeling, which comes from concrete experience. And he says that to adequately and effectively learn something, you actually have to experience it in all four of those modalities and not just one. So if we look at the first modality on the bottom right, it speaks to thinking and watching, which I think is where we have predominantly spent our time in the learning space. And we haven't expanded enough effort into the others, especially on the digital platform. So what I want to do to make this, diagram meaningful is I want us to think through some of the activities that fit into each of these quadrants in the physical offline world, and then look at how have we reinterpreted those for the digital world. And you'll see that there actually hasn't been as much work on that digital employee experience when it comes to sharing expertise and knowledge. So in the first quadrant, around how do we learn when we think and watch, I think we've been pretty good at coming up with stuff like lectures, videos, questioning and quizzes and stuff like that, journaling in a book, observing. And that kind of encompasses a lot of the stuff that we would have done offline. In the next quadrant, around thinking and doing, we've done stuff that's more interactive, project-based work, on-the-job learning, applying some exercises in a training workshop, and having that moment to sort of apply those new learnings. And for those innovative companies, design sprints, where you actually unpack new products or ideas or tackle existing challenges in the business. In the third modality, how do we feel and do? This is where I think we've used concepts like simulations and projects again, feedback and sharing mechanisms where people in a peer group can relate and share their experiences, as well as on-the-job experience. If you've been in some of those training workshops, you'll see that there's also a lot of role-playing that comes up. In the fourth quadrant, how we feel and watch is something that's probably harder to get done, but it ends up being a lot of classroom talk, storytelling, mentorship, observation, anything that can tap into the emotive elements. Often most of our academic stuff is really sitting in the bottom half, and we're not connecting those emotive elements. And this problem gets compounded when we go into the digital employee experience. And this is what I want to highlight so that we can think about how we more broadly address the digital employee experience and address those other big questions. When we start on the bottom right quadrant again, you can see the typical culprits of digital employee experience and learning, where you do have your typical e-learning platforms, some video watches and the like. And what we've done a lot more, for example, in Rekindle is more around just-in-time learning, as opposed to people flipping through sort of notes and reading material, as well as personalized questioning, which provides that greater level of sort of reinforcement. In the third quadrant, or second quadrant rather, some of the digital experiences that I think we'll start to see more of is not just, micro or bite-sized or just-in-time learning on your phone, but is there further engagement? Are you able to share? Are there surveys? Is there ongoing messaging and communications to allow for that feedback and sharing in a digital construct? I think that there'll also be some really interesting work around augmented reality, particularly where people are working in factories or manufacturing environments, where you'd be able to use augmented reality to enrich that physical world with more information. Virtual labs is also quite a big thing, because I think with all the new digital skills we're developing, for example, wanting to create cloud architects or data science engineers, a lot of it traditionally sort of stayed in classroom settings or workshops or projects that you would have done on your own. And I think what we're seeing a lot of the digital employee experiences now is about creating virtual labs that are actually spun up in the cloud, already tooled with the right resources so that people can continue the learning from the theory. And virtual design sprints is something that we've experimented with quite recently. Instead of having, those in-person design sprints that we had before, there's now so many tools like Miro, for example, that is used to facilitate those virtual design sprints. And we've actually successfully created products and tackled challenges in this kind of setup. And this sort of gives you a much broader range of how can you engage people, tap into their expertise so that you can address these challenges in your businesses without having to wait to get into the office again. And we know that's sort of not likely to happen in at least this year. In the third quadrant, I'm seeing a lot of opportunity there for virtual reality as the additional modality, because we've already seen how well proven it is to connect people and to really make people feel like they're in that moment. And I'll provide some examples later as well. In the final quadrant, this is the one where I think we've seen some shifts to virtual classrooms, and this for me is much bigger than Zoom or Teams. We don't realize that those tools are not actually designed for a learning or training environment, and there's actually specific tools that are better able to support virtual classrooms. We've also all watched TED Talks, and this is where I would put the category there because they're often a lot more emotive and connecting, and the explainer videos that we often watch around products are a lot more engaging than I think your sort of standard videos that don't have as much emotive elements in it. So looking at all of these four modalities, I'm hoping that you can see that there's actually a broad range of stuff that needs to be provided for people to be able to go on this learning journey more holistically. So in terms of that first quadrant that I covered around thinking and watching, these are some examples of stuff that I've seen in the space. So this, for example, is some of our just-in-time learning approaches and interfaces where it's about those short videos, interactive questions that are adaptive and personalized to meet that employee's particular gaps and needs. And this kind of just-in-time learning means that people can learn continuously as opposed to those once-off day workshops or trying to clock 3 hours in the afternoon to do some e-learning. And this changes the paradigm. Instead of once-off learning experiences, we're looking at how do you learn 20, 30 minutes a day, knowing that this is what ultimately helps us achieve longer-term retention. We're also seeing a trend around the space of just-in-time learning for just-in-time content creation, where experts in those spaces should be able to easily create content. And the kinds of new tools out there allow for that rapid content creation using templates, for example. The second quadrant that I mentioned around the feedback and sharing and supporting those activities or modalities, here are a couple of examples to illustrate that. For example, in those just-in-time learning tools or any other mobile learning, it's really becoming quite important to integrate those communications, those rapid surveys. So it's not a once-off thing. So if you can imagine a sales enablement program, you could have your just-in-time learning, but then you also probably want to push something every week that handles perhaps new objections in the sales environment based on the feedback that you're actually getting from the staff and employees. This, in my mind, is really much more effective in cascading information through an organization. I think we often overlook that you need to activate different levels of an organization to actually get the learning and the transfer across. We focus on the town halls, the presentations or the Zoom calls, but what do we give our middle managers and middle management, for example, to discuss with their teams, and what do we give individual staff to look at and engage with so that they can get up to speed with this new strategy or whatever the intervention is. I mentioned virtual labs earlier, which are going to become crucial in actually providing a space for application of the new kinds of digital skills that we're wanting to develop, from data science to software development, digital marketing, and the like. The virtual design sprints that I mentioned can also be done using tools like Mural, as I mentioned, where it can help you think visually. So now you've gone past the learning that is transferring knowledge to people, and you're able to do learning that allows people to create new products, that allows people to tackle challenges in the business. And this is really where it becomes powerful, because all of that lived experience and insights can now be manifested, that allows you to capture the greatest insights of your team. The final thing I mentioned in this quadrant was around augmented reality. And here you can see some examples of how it's used in a manufacturing or factory environment. So instead of just seeing boxes, you're able to use the camera on your tablet to actually pick up other information. And for someone who's new in this environment, you can imagine how helpful this is if you can point to a complex machine and suddenly it gives you all of the enriching tools and insights that help you understand how to work that particular machine. And in the third quadrant, I mentioned virtual reality and how that can be used. For me, this is powerful because it's all about using virtual reality to grab someone's attention, to provide an environment of unlimited practice so that people are not just waiting for real life experiences and exposure to be able to learn how to apply that new theory and knowledge. And I'm really hopeful that we're going to be able to see not just technical training in the VR environment, but also soft skills training, creativity development and training, because we're now able to curate experiences appropriate for the level of skill that those people may need to access. I think within the SETA framework, we've seen quite a lot of interest in virtual reality of late. And we know that in that framework, they focus a lot on the theoretical stuff in the TVETs and then the applied learning within the actual workshops and then getting that work experience. So I'm seeing a potential value in how we can use that just-in-time or bite-sized learning for the theory and how we can use augmented reality and virtual reality for the practical application so that we can cover the different modalities of learning in these traditional frameworks of learning. In the final quadrant, there isn't really a lot of additional examples that I haven't mentioned already, but simply to mention that high quality entertaining videos will still play a key part in learning. We all know the success of the Khan Academy platform. And now with the world of COVID, we're seeing the value of live interaction and mentoring inside actual learning programs. So it's not a static experience. And that, ladies and gentlemen, really summarizes the modalities that I was talking about and how we can expand our horizons beyond PowerPoint slides, beyond training manuals to appreciate the different experiences people actually need in order to successfully learn. Thank you so much for joining my session, and I look forward to the questions and discussions that we'll have in the breakaway session.